The land was wide and empty, stretching as far as the eye could see. Dry winds moved through the grass, carrying dust and silence. An old ranch stood in the middle of this forgotten valley, its wooden fences bent with age, its roof patched with metal. No one came here anymore. No travelers, no neighbors, no family, only one man lived here. A retired soldier, a human who had seen too much of the galaxy. For many years he had chosen this place, far from the noise of cities and far from the memories of war. He lived with simple things, his horses, his dogs, his tools, and the endless sky above. Every morning he rose before the sun, fixing broken wires, checking his land, drinking bitter coffee. Every evening he sat by the fire, staring into the flames, listening to the silence that surrounded him like a heavy blanket. The man had no friends left. Most were gone, lost in battles or scattered across the stars. He never spoke about his past, never told anyone what he had done. But the scars on his hands, the look in his eyes, and the way he always kept a rifle near the door told their own story. The ranch was not just his home, it was his cage, and it was also his shield. Rumors spread in faraway towns. People whispered about him. Some said he was dangerous, others said he was broken. A few remembered his name from military reports and old news broadcasts. But no one dared to visit. The valley belonged to him, and he preferred it that way. At night, the stars filled the sky, brighter here than anywhere else. He often sat outside, staring upward, as if waiting for something or someone. Sometimes, he thought he heard voices in the wind, echoes of his old squad. Other times, he thought he saw shapes moving across the horizon, ships passing silently in the dark. But when morning came, everything was quiet again. Just the old man and his ranch, the RE. Years passed like this, one season folding into another. Rain came rarely. Storms came suddenly, and still he stayed. The dogs barked at strangers that never came. The horses carried loads that had no purpose. And the man's heart grew heavier with each year of solitude. Yet despite his silence, he was not weak. He still trained, still kept his weapons sharp, still checked the sky with old scanners he had hidden in his barn. He told himself it was only habit, only routine. But deep inside he knew better. He was waiting not for peace but for trouble, because trouble always found humans sooner or later. One cold evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, the dogs began to grow restless. Their ears twitched, their eyes fixed on the dark line of the horizon. The man frowned, leaning on his cane, listening. The wind carried a sound that did not belong here, a low hum, broken and uneven, like an engine gasping for life. The night grew heavier, the stars hidden by moving clouds. The hum grew louder, then weaker, then loud again. He stepped outside, his boots sinking into dry earth, and looked across the valley. For the first time in years, his heart beat faster. A warning, a memory, a call to arms. The old rancher narrowed his eyes, and in the distance he saw lights. Not lanterns, not fire, but something else, something alien. He stood still, gripping the wooden rail of his porch. The dogs barked louder, pulling at their chains, sensing what he already felt. Something was coming, something that would break his years of silence. The man did not run, did not hide. Instead, he walked back into the house, slow but steady. He opened a locked chest and pulled out an old weapon covered in dust but ready. The weight felt natural in his hands. As if no time had passed since he last carried it, he returned to the porch, eyes fixed on the approaching lights. His ranch had been quiet for so long, but tonight it would not be. The silence of the valley was ending. The lonely rancher was not alone anymore. The lights came closer, trembling across the dark valley like dying stars. The dogs howled and snapped at the night air, their voices sharp and urgent. The rancher stood still on his porch, his weapon resting against his arm, waiting. He had seen many things in his life, but he had not expected this night to be different. Yet something inside told him it would change everything. At last the figures appeared, walking through the dust, their shapes strange against the faint glow. There were 11 of them, moving, slowly, as if carrying the weight of worlds on their shoulders. Not soldiers, not hunters, not raiders, but women. their forms cloaked in long fabric torn by travel, their steps heavy, their eyes lowered. When they reached his fence, they stopped, standing in silence, shivering under the cold wind. The rancher did not speak at first. He only studied them, his gaze sharp, his breath steady. He had lived long enough to know danger often came in quiet disguises, but these visitors did not hold weapons. They did not raise threats. Instead, they bowed their heads as if he were the one with power over their fate. One of them, taller than the rest, finally stepped forward. Her skin shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Not human, but alien. Her voice trembled when she spoke, carrying an accent heavy with pain. "We have nowhere else to go," she said. "We beg you for shelter." The rancher's jaw tightened. Aliens here at his gate in the middle of nowhere. He had seen their kind in war zones, had fought beside some, fought against others. But never had he seen a group like this, 11 widows, broken yet unbroken, standing together in the night. He asked no questions at first, his silence testing them. They lowered themselves to the ground, kneeling in the dust. Their hands shook as they held them open, showing emptiness, no weapons, no tools, nothing but desperation. Even the dogs grew quieter, confused by the lack of threat. The tall widow spoke again, her eyes dark with sorrow. "Our homes are gone. Our mates are gone. Our ships are gone. We have only this, a chance to beg, a chance to survive." Her words echoed in the empty valley. The rancher felt the weight of them, though he said nothing. He thought of his years of solitude, his silent walls, his empty table. He thought of the wars that had stolen his own friends and family. He had sworn never again to carry the burdens of others, yet here they were, strangers from another world, looking at him as if he was their last hope. He turned his gaze toward the sky where clouds drifted slow and heavy. Perhaps they had been followed. Perhaps danger trailed them like shadows. Bringing them inside could mean war. Turning them away could mean their death. Minutes passed, long and silent. The widows shivered in the dust, their bodies weak from hunger and cold. The rancher finally breathed out, his decision heavy but clear. "Get up," he said, his voice low but firm. "Come inside." They rose slowly, surprise flickering in their alien eyes. The ranch door opened, and for the first time in years, strangers stepped across its threshold. The widows entered carefully, whispering to one another in soft tones. The house, once filled with silence, now carried the faint sound of unfamiliar voices. Inside, they settled on the floor, their cloaks spread like broken wings. The rancher lit a fire, its flames rising bright, casting long shadows across the room. The women huddled close, their faces softening as the warmth touched them. He set out food, plain but filling bread and dried meat, and watched them eat with quiet desperation. Still he did not trust them. Not yet. He kept his weapon near, his eyes sharp, but he could not ignore the truth. They were not raiders. They were not spies. They were survivors, and survivors always carried stories. As the fire burned, one of the widows began to sing. Her voice was soft, almost broken, yet it carried a strange beauty. The others joined in, a sorrowful harmony of loss and memory. The sound filled the house like a ghostly wind, rising and falling with grief that words alone could not hold. The rancher sat back, listening, feeling the weight of their sorrow. For the first time in many years, his house did not feel empty. It felt fragile, alive, and dangerous all at once. He knew nothing about their enemies or the reason they had come, but one truth burned in his mind. His ranch was no longer his alone. When the fire sank low and the widows lay resting, the rancher stood by the window. His eyes scanned the horizon once more, searching for signs of pursuit. The valley was quiet again, but the silence was different now. It was not the silence of emptiness, but the silence before a storm. The rancher tightened his grip on the old weapon at his side. The unexpected visitors had entered his life, and with them came shadows he could not yet see. The night was far from over, and the true danger had only just begun. Morning came slow across the valley, painting the ranch in pale gold. The rancher stepped outside, his boots crunching against dry earth, breathing in the cold air. For years his mornings had been the same, silent, empty, predictable. But this morning was different. Behind him, his house no longer lay in silence. Through the thin walls he heard voices, strange and soft, the alien widows whispering in their own language. The sound felt unnatural, yet it did not anger him. It unsettled him. His ranch had been a tomb of solitude for years, and now it was filled with breath, with movement, with life. It was no longer only his refuge, it was theirs too. When he stepped back inside, he found them already awake. They had cleaned the floor, folded their torn cloaks neatly, and stacked the empty dishes with care. They bowed their heads when he entered, a quiet sign of respect. The tall widow, the one who had spoken first last night, rose to face him. "We thank you," she said, her voice steady, though her eyes showed exhaustion. "We did not expect kindness from a human," the rancher grunted, offering no reply. He set water to boil, poured strong coffee into his cup, and watched them carefully. The widows sat together, whispering, their movements precise, almost ritual-like. They were not chaotic strangers. They carried discipline, a shared bond. When one of them coughed, the others touched her shoulders gently, offering comfort without words. It reminded him of something he had lost long ago. A squad, a family, unity forged through pain. The day stretched on, and the house once cold now carried warmth. The widows moved quietly, helping with small tasks. Two of them fetched water from the well, another mended the broken curtains, others swept dust from corners. The rancher had not asked for their help, yet they gave it freely. Still he remained. Cautious, he noticed how their eyes often searched the sky, how they flinched when the wind carried echoes of distant thunder. At night they whispered longer, their voices sharp and hurried. Though he did not understand the words, he understood fear. One evening, while the fire burned low, one widow told her story. Her voice cracked, but the others nodded, as if the pain was shared. Her mate had been a warrior, killed in an ambush, their city burned, their people scattered. She had fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and the memories in her heart. The others, one by one, added their stories. Each tale was the same in its sorrow. Mates lost, homes destroyed, lives torn apart. The rancher listened in silence, the firelight flickering across his weathered face. He did not share his own story, but his silence carried its own weight. They could feel it. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the rhythm of the ranch changed. Where there had been only footsteps, of one now there were many. The sound of laughter sometimes rose from the kitchen, soft but real. For the first time in years, the walls did not echo with emptiness, yet, with life came unease. The widows often paused in their work, glancing toward the sky as if expecting it to open with fire. One night he caught them outside, standing in a circle, their hands raised, whispering prayers to stars he could not name. When he stepped forward, they stopped instantly, their eyes guilty, as if hiding something. He did not press them, but suspicion grew inside him. Why had they chosen this place, his ranch in all the endless world? It was no accident, he knew. Nothing in life was accidental. The widows had brought secrets, and secrets always came with a cost. That night, after they had gone to sleep, he walked through the ranch. He checked his fences, his sensors, his hidden traps, all old but still working. In the barn, he uncovered his old scanner, brushing off years of dust. He switched it on, the machine humming weakly but alive. The screen flickered, showing the valley in ghostly light. For a moment nothing moved, only the wind and the shadows of his animals. Then he saw it, faint but clear. A signal in the distance, not natural, not random. Something was out there, watching, waiting. The rancher's eyes narrowed. The widows had not told him everything, of that he was certain. They were not just broken wanderers searching for shelter. They were being hunted, and by offering them safety, he had painted a target on his land. The next morning he did not speak of what he had seen. Instead, he watched them closer, studying every movement, every whisper. The widows avoided his gaze, their voices softer when he passed. The house was alive, yes, but it was also filled with tension. The rancher sharpened his tools, oiled his weapons, and trained his dogs. He told himself it was only routine, old habits that never died. But deep down he knew, his ranch was no longer just a home. It had become a fortress, and a fortress only existed because war was coming. He stood once more on his porch that night, staring at the stars. The widows slept inside, unaware of the shadows that crept closer each day. The house was alive, but life had brought danger, and the rancher knew in his bones that the storm was almost here. The nights grew colder and the rancher found himself waking often. The house, once a place of silence, now carried strange sounds. Whispers floated through the walls, faint but sharp, like secrets slipping through cracks. The alien widows spoke, in low voices when they thought he was asleep. At first he ignored it, telling himself they were only sharing memories. But the whispers carried tones of fear, urgency, and sometimes anger. Their voices rose and fell in strange rhythms. Like arguments cut short, each night the tension thickened, pressing against the old wood of the ranch. The rancher had lived long enough to know the difference between grief and secrecy. Grief wept openly, but secrecy always hid in whispers. He began to listen more closely, sitting awake by the fire. The widows thought he was dreaming, but his ears caught fragments of their hidden truth. Words he could not understand repeated again and again, a name perhaps, or a place, followed by silence. Their voices trembled when they spoke it, as if afraid. The stars themselves might hear. The rancher's suspicion hardened. These women carried more than sorrow. They carried danger. One evening he stepped outside for air, the sky heavy with clouds. The wind carried faint static, a sound he had not heard in years. It was the crackle of a signal, hidden but alive. He turned toward the barn, where his old scanner still hummed weakly. The screen glowed in green light, showing the valley in waves of energy, and there it was again. A pulse, steady and unnatural. Something beyond the hills was searching, sending signals into the dark. He clenched, his jaw, his suspicions confirmed. When he returned to the house, the whispers stopped at once. The widows looked up, their faces pale, their eyes heavy with secrets. They bowed their heads quickly, pretending nothing had passed between them. But the air was thick with guilt, and the rancher's patience was wearing thin. Later that night, as the fire died low, he asked a question, at last. "Who is hunting you?" His voice steady, his eyes unblinking. The widows froze, their whispers silenced. The tall widow who had first spoken at his gate looked at him, her face shadowed by the fire. For a long moment she said nothing, then finally she spoke. "They will come," she whispered. "They always come." Her words sent a chill across the room. The others lowered their heads, shivering as if the very thought could break them. The rancher said no more, but his mind raced with questions. Days passed, but the unease grew sharper. Strange accidents began to happen on the ranch. Fences cut, water barrels drained, tools missing from the shed. The rancher found tracks in the dirt too sharp to be human, too precise to be wild. He cleaned his weapons each morning now. His dogs grew restless, barking at empty fields, their fur rising at shadows that moved too quickly. The widows grew quieter, no laughter, no songs, only silence and whispers. The rancher felt the storm, pressing closer, unseen but certain. One afternoon, while tending the horses, he found one widow outside alone. She stood by the fence, her eyes on the sky, her hands trembling. He approached quietly, his shadow falling across the dust. She turned quickly, her face pale, her lips pressed tight. "You know," he said flatly, his voice more statement than question. The widow lowered her gaze, unable to meet his eyes. "They killed our mates, they burned our homes, and now they hunt us still," she whispered. "We thought we could hide here, but no place is hidden forever." Her words carried the truth he had already guessed. The widows had not stumbled upon his ranch by chance. They had chosen it because they believed a human could protect them, because the galaxy remembered what humans once were, warriors that even empires feared. That night, the rancher stood watch outside, his rifle resting against his arm. The stars glimmered above, sharp and endless, but he no longer saw peace in them, only warning. He could almost feel eyes staring down from the dark, searching for his land. Inside, the widows prayed in their soft voices, their whispers weaving into a sorrowful chant. The rancher listened, their words foreign yet heavy with meaning. He felt the weight of their hope pressing on him. They believed he could stand between them and death, but he was only one man, a tired man. He had left the wars behind, sworn never to fight again. Yet fate had dragged war back to his doorstep, wearing the faces of widows who begged for shelter. The past he had buried was rising again, with sharp claws and heavy shadows. When dawn came, he made his choice. He pulled his old armor from the chest, dented but strong. He checked the hidden mines, the rusted turrets, the silent drones sleeping in the barn. The ranch was no longer just land, it was now a fortress waiting for fire. The widows watched him, fear in their eyes, but also something else. Trust, belief, a fragile hope that maybe one human was enough. And as the sun rose over the valley, the rancher's silence broke at last. "If they come," he said, his voice steady as stone, "they will regret it." The valley was quiet, but the rancher no longer trusted quiet. Silence could be a mask, a thin cover hiding teeth waiting to bite. Each night he walked the fences, boots crunching the dirt, dogs restless at his side, and each night the widows gathered close inside the house, whispering like shadows that never slept. One evening, the scanner in the barn gave a low warning hum. Its green light flickered across the screen, a sharp pulse breaking the calm. The rancher leaned closer, his weathered hand steady on the controls. A signal had been caught, faint but deliberate. Not natural, not random. He knew the language of signals. This one was a search pattern, sweeping across the valley like a net thrown wide. It wasn't meant for him. It was meant for the widows. Whoever hunted them was close, far closer than he wanted. The rancher shut the scanner off and walked back to the house. His face carried no fear, only grim resolve. Inside, the fire crackled low. The widows sat silent, their eyes heavy with unease. They knew without being told their hunters were near. He set his rifle on the table, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice hard as stone. The tall widow stood, her cloak wrapped tight around her thin shoulders. Her lips trembled before she answered. "They are the Rithari." The name meant nothing to him, but the way the others lowered their heads spoke enough. "They killed our mates," she continued. "They hunt the women who remain. They call us dishonor, they call us waste, they mean to erase us." Her voice broke, but her eyes held fire. "We ran, but they do not stop. They follow us across stars. They will follow until none remain, me." Rancher listened in silence, his jaw tight. He had seen such cruelty before, names changed, but the hunger for power was always the same. He looked around the room, at the widows clutching each other, at their eyes filled with both fear and hope. Then he spoke, his voice cold. "They'll come here, they'll come for you, and they'll bring fire." The widows did not deny it, one whispered softly. "We chose you because humans do not bend. Humans fight." Her words sank deep into him, stirring the old fire he had buried. He had left war behind, but war had found him again. That night, he walked the land alone, the moon casting long silver shadows. He checked the old mines he had buried years ago, still waiting beneath the dirt like sleeping wolves. He tested the turrets hidden under tarps, rust on their frames but their cores still alive. He sharpened his blades, cleaned his rifles, and prepared. From the hills the dogs barked into the distance. The rancher looked up, and in the black sky, he saw faint lights moving. Not stars, but ships, their engines dim, their hunt careful. They were searching, patient, confident, like predators circling prey. He felt no fear, only the steady weight of choice. If he stood aside, the widows would be taken, erased like dust. If he fought, his land would burn, his silence would end. But his blood had never been built for silence. At dawn, the widows joined him outside. Their eyes were red from sleepless nights, but their hands were steady. "We will fight too," the tall one said, her voice no longer trembling. Each of them stepped forward, revealing small devices, knives, or broken weapons they had hidden in their cloaks. The rancher studied them, scarred and weary but unbroken. They were not helpless. They were survivors, perhaps hunted, perhaps broken in spirit, but fire still lived in them. He gave a short nod, the closest thing to approval he ever gave. The day passed in preparation. Together they built barricades across the fences, dragged scrap metal into place, set traps around the barn. The widows worked in silence, their movements efficient, practiced. They had prepared for war before. They were preparing again. As the sun fell, the scanner lit once more. This time the signal was stronger, closer, sharper. The hunters were no longer searching wide. They had found the valley. It was only a matter of time before they struck. The rancher stood on his porch as the sky turned dark, his rifle slung across his shoulder, his armor heavy on his frame. The widows gathered behind him, their eyes on the horizon. Together they waited, listening to the growing hum of engines. Hidden in the night, the valley was no longer quiet, not truly. It breathed with tension, with the promise of violence. And when the first shadow crossed the stars, the rancher's voice cut through the silence. "They've found us," he said, "and they're coming." The night was heavy, the valley wrapped in a silence that felt alive. The widows stood together near the fire, their eyes wide, their hands clutching what little weapons they carried. The rancher checked his rifle one last time, the metal cold but steady in his grip. He had defended land before, defended men before, but this time felt different. This time it was his home. Out beyond the hills, the sky flickered, faint glows moving like ghosts across the horizon. The hunters were near, their ships cutting through clouds with slow precision. The rancher's scanner beeped in warning, green lines crawling across the screen. There was no more waiting. No, more whispers. The storm had come. "Positions," the rancher said, his voice calm. The widows scattered, each taking place where he had shown them. Some crouched behind barricades of wood and metal, some near the barn where old turrets waited. To rise, others knelt in the dirt, hands on strange alien devices glowing with dim blue light. The dogs barked wildly, pulling at chains, sensing what humans and aliens alike already knew. Death was coming to the valley, and it would not pass quietly. The rancher moved slow, checking each line, adjusting each trap. He gave short nods. The widows answered with silent determination. Then the first sound came. The hiss of engines breaking the night. A dark shape swept across the stars, larger than any barn, black as shadow. The hunters had arrived, their ship gliding above like a predator circling prey. Its lights cut the ground, beams sweeping across the ranch, searching, hunting. The widows ducked low, their faces pale but unflinching. The rancher raised his hand, waiting, holding back fire until the moment was right. Another ship followed, then another, the sky now filled with shadows. The valley trembled under the weight of their engines. The first beam of light struck the barn, burning wood and metal in a blaze. The widows cried out but held their ground. The rancher fired, a single shot slicing into the dark. The bullet struck, true, sparking against the ship's underbelly, not enough to kill but enough to anger. The turrets roared to life, hidden beneath tarps for years. They spat fire into the night, shells cutting through the dark with thunder. One ship swerved, its engines screaming, smoke trailing behind as it spun into the hills. The widows raised their devices, beams of alien light striking the ground soldiers, who poured from the ships. The battle had begun, fierce and unrelenting. The rancher moved with a speed that belied his years, each shot measured, each strike precise. The widows fought with desperation, their grief forged into fury. Together, they turned the quiet ranch into a wall of fire. But the hunters were many, armored figures moving like shadows. Their weapons cut through fences, their voices harsh and alien. The ground shook as they advanced, step by step closer to the house. The widows screamed defiance. Their voices carried. By the crack of fire, the rancher pulled a lever, Mines hidden beneath the earth erupted. Explosions tore through the field, dust and smoke rising high. Hunters fell, their black armor burning in the flames. The valley shook, the widows cheered, but the fight was far from over. The largest ship descended, its shadow swallowing the ranch. Its ramp opened, and more hunters marched down, their numbers endless. The widows faltered, fear gripping their eyes, but the rancher's voice cut through the chaos, steady and sharp. "Hold the line!" He charged forward, rifle blazing, dogs at his side, bullets tore through armor, the hunters fell, their weapons clattering. The widows followed, their voices rising, beams of light cutting the night. For a moment it seemed possible, 1 human and 11 widows holding back an army, yet the hunters pressed harder, their fire striking walls, burning the barn, shattering fences. The rancher took a hit, armor dented, blood on his sleeve. He staggered but did not fall, his eyes burning with the fire of old wars. The widows rushed to his side, covering him with their strange shields. The battle raged on, hour after hour. The ranch was no longer a home but a fortress under siege. Every wall burned, every stone shook, but still they stood. Still they fought, side by side, refusing to bow. At last, one widow unleashed a hidden power. She raised a small orb, glowing white, and threw it into the sky. It burst like a star, waves of light tearing through the hunters. Ships faltered, soldiers screamed. The valley shook. With fury, the rancher looked at her in shock. She only nodded, her face grim. "We did not come empty," she whispered. He understood then. They had brought more than sorrow. They had brought weapons meant for last stands. And this was their last stand. The hunters fell back, their ships retreating into the clouds. Smoke covered the valley. Fires burned across the ranch. The widows dropped to their knees, exhausted, trembling but alive. The rancher stood tall, his rifle smoking, his breath heavy but steady. The night returned to silence, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence after war, heavy with ash and blood. The ranch was scarred, broken in places, but it had not fallen. The widows lived, and so did he. The valley was quiet again, but it was no longer the quiet of peace. Ash drifted across the ranch, smoke rising in thin trails toward the stars. The fences lay broken. The barn burned to half its bones. The earth blackened by fire and blood. The dogs limped through the yard, tired but alive, their ears twitching at every sound. The rancher stood in the middle of it all, his rifle hanging at his side. His armor was dented, his arm cut, his body weary, but his eyes burned steady. He had fought battles before, he had stood on broken ground before, but never had a fight felt this personal, this sharp, this heavy. Behind him the widows gathered, their cloaks torn, their faces streaked with dust and tears. They were survivors once more, but now they were not only survivors, they were defenders. They had stood with him when the storm came. They had held the line when the hunters pressed. And though many had fallen in flame, the widows still stood alive, unbroken. The ranch, once a tomb of silence, now carried voices of life. Even in ruin, even in ash, the place felt alive in a way it never had before. The widows moved together, rebuilding small things, tending the wounded animals, burying the dead hunters beyond the hills. Their unity was stronger now, bound not only by loss but by survival shared with a human. That night they sat by the fire, though the fire burned low and weak. The rancher sat apart, his gaze on the sky. He had not wanted this war, had not wanted these strangers, had not wanted the burden of lives pressed into his hands. But they had come, and he had chosen. And now the weight of that choice sat heavy, but firm on his shoulders. The tall widow moved closer, her steps slow but steady. She knelt by his side, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "You saved us," she whispered. "And in saving us, you saved yourself," the rancher said. Nothing, but in his silence she heard the truth. For years he had lived alone, buried in ghosts of his past. But in fighting for them, he had found a piece of himself again. Not the soldier who marched under banners, not the man who lost everything in distant wars, but the human who still had strength, still had fire, still had meaning. Days passed, the ranch slowly healing. The widows built shelters from the wreckage of the ships, their alien hands skilled in craft. Fields once empty began to grow with new life as they planted seeds carried from their ruined homes. The valley no longer stood in silence. It echoed with voices, laughter, and the sound of rebuilding. The rancher walked among them, silent but present. He fixed fences, taught them how to tend the animals, showed them how to survive on the land. They, in turn, showed him strange skills, alien tools, songs of memory that eased the weight of long nights. Together they built something neither human nor alien alone could have built. News spread in whispers across the stars. The Rathari had been pushed back, humiliated by one human and a group of widows they had sought to erase. Rumors grew, legends formed. The name of the lonely rancher carried into distant systems. A warning, a story, a reminder. Humans were not to be taken lightly. But the rancher himself cared little for legends. He cared for the fences standing, again for the sound of dogs barking with joy, for the widows laughing as they worked. He cared for the warmth of fire shared with voices that no longer whispered only sorrow but hope. He cared that he was no longer alone. One evening, as the sun sank into blood-red clouds, the widows gathered by the porch. They stood in silence before him, their faces steady, their eyes shining with quiet strength. The tall widow spoke, her voice carrying across the wind. "You gave us shelter when no one else would. You gave us life when we had only death. From this day, this ranch is not only yours, it is ours." The rancher looked at them, his weathered face unreadable. He wanted to refuse, to remind them he was only one man, only a tired soldier, but he saw in their eyes the truth. They were no longer asking. They were claiming their place, and deep inside, he knew he wanted it that way. For years, the ranch had been a fortress of silence. Now it was a sanctuary, a place where grief turned to strength, where the hunted found shelter, where the lonely found family. The widows called him guardian, protector, even legend. But he knew himself simply as a man who opened his door when the night came knocking. And as the stars glimmered above, brighter than ever, the rancher felt the weight of solitude lift at last. He was no longer alone in the valley, no longer a ghost. In his own land, the legacy of his ranch was no longer silence but shelter,